Talktainmentradio.com. We give you a reason to come. The world's greatest radio. We give you a reason to stay. Radio the way it should be heard. You got the power.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests and not necessarily those of TalkTainmentRadio.com, 3MR Production, its ownership, management, or staff.
We've got the power.
This is The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio. Radio the way it should be heard. And now, Mr. Neely Fuller.
If you do not understand white supremacy, which is racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Only confuse you. Only confuse you.
This is The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr. I'm Brother Kahari, sitting in every week at this time with Mr. Fuller. You can reach Mr. Fuller live today at 1-877-932-9766. I'll slow it down and give it to you again. 1-877-932-9766. This is The Compensatory Concept, and we welcome in every week at this time live. You can hear us live today at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every Wednesday. And then you can hear us tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com. The Compensatory Concept can only be heard on TalkTainmentRadio.com. And if you miss both, and I hope that you don't, you can also catch Mr. Fuller on the podcast. All you have to do is go to TalkTainmentRadio.com, click on programs, and then go straight to Mr. Fuller's show. And you got it right then and right there. So let me welcome in Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, sir, how are you doing today?
I'm still learning.
All right. Mr. Fuller, tell us how we can get your two works and the names of them, please.
The name of the book is The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, and that's the main title. That's not understandable until you read inside the book. But there is a subtitle, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and/or action for victims of racism. And racism is described as the system of white supremacy. That's a textbook workbook that's addressed to individual persons, the individual person who considers him or herself as a person who's having to deal with racism either directly or indirectly, or the effects thereof. And you can get it by going to your computer, put in producejustice.com. That's producejustice.com. And what will come up on your screen is the basic textbook and an additional word guide showing you how to use words, what words to use for, how to use the words, what words to look for when other people are using these words, and what definitions to look for, and what questions to ask about the use of these words. And you can either get the basic book or the word guide, or both, depending on what you like about the description of the books. Okay. And there's a method for ordering.
All right. Thank you there, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, we're going to talk about an area that we don't get into much, one of the 9 areas. And one of the 9 areas that you mentioned is labor. We just saw here the other day where fast food workers walked out in an organized strike against low wages. They walked out against the fast food industry. That includes Wendy's, McDonald's, all of them. And so they want either a union or they want to raise their wages up to $15 an hour. Now, this happens to coincide at the same time where the president has been going around the country talking about doing something for corporate tax wage rates, small business tax wage rates, and to hopefully produce stimulus for more jobs. Now, that basically tells us that there's something wrong with the unemployment, with this information we've been getting, because if you still got to work on it to that degree, that means that many people are still not employed. So the true picture, the true number that we're getting is obviously bogus. So, but the question is, Mr. Fuller, in the area of labor, what is justice in the area of labor? Because we don't discuss that enough, or we don't discuss it as much as we should. Let's get into labor today. Let's talk about what it is. Number one, what do you mean by labor under the code? And number two, how do we get justice in the area of labor? Mr. Fuller.
Well, you get justice in the area of labor the same way you get justice in all other areas of activity, and that is go to the definition, the compensatory definition, the one that I use, the one that I made up, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. So if the people who are demonstrating feel like they're not getting the most constructive help, then they ask for it. You always have to ask people who have what it is that you want, or who have presented themselves to the world as people who have the answers to these questions. People who are in business are appealing to people out there to buy their products and whatnot, and they have to have people who are helping them sell the products, or they have advertised that they want people to help them sell their products. So when the people who are selling the products, who are moving the products, say that, well, we need more out of this transaction than what we're getting because we're not getting the help that we need the most. So they just present their requests. You ask for what should be given, you accept what is granted, and then you try to compensate for the difference. Apparently, the people who are out there demonstrating are trying to compensate for the difference between what they asked for and what they got by demonstrating that they need more in order to take care of what they have to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the procedure. It's the only procedure that people have been able to figure out down through the ages. People ask people. There's only several ways. There's 3 ways as far as I know, because no one ever told me this as many times as I've asked, but I concluded myself there's only 3 ways to get what we call capital, and what we're touting as a capitalistic system. Everybody's told, don't be a communist, don't be a socialist, don't be any of these other isms, be a capitalist. Believe in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Believe in supporting capital.
Free enterprise.
So I have asked for years, what is capital? What do you mean by capitalism? And I always get very vague answers, even though someone may talk for 3 hours. I never quite understood what was being said because they were using words that were completely alien to me. But I concluded on my own, there's 3 ways to get capital. If you're going to have capital the way that I understand it and the way that I see people usually get it. And that is you invent something or produce something that people want or need. That's number 1. You invent something or produce something that people want or need. It might be in the form of you just getting a job and putting something on the counter that people want or need. And so you get capital for doing that. Okay, and then the next one is robbing and stealing. That's the biggest one. I concluded that. Now, if that's not true, then somebody can tell me that it's not true. That's the biggest one. The biggest way to get capital, robbing and stealing, like Columbus did. He first asked someone, he went to the third one, he asked someone who had capital, because that's the third way. You ask someone. Mm-hmm. Columbus, I use this as an illustration.
You talking about Christopher Columbus?
Christopher Columbus went to Ferdinand and Isabella, who were kings and queens, a king and a queen, to get what? Capital. In order to buy what? Some boats. Mm-hmm. Columbus had an idea, an invention, you might say, and he invented the idea of getting to the east by sailing west, but he didn't have any boats. He didn't have any boats because he didn't have any capital, didn't have any money to buy boats and outfit the boats. So he did the logical thing. He went to someone who had it, and he asked them for it. That's that third way of getting it. And that's a very prominent way. Okay, so they decided, well, we'll bankroll you in this. Now, in the interim, you might ask the question, the logical question, where did Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand get their capital? They got it by robbing and stealing. They call it taxes or whatever, but they went around and told people, if you have 3 goats, you're going to give me 2 of those goats. Why? Because I'm the king. That's why. I'll send my soldiers around and take what we want. And we'll give it a fancy name called taxes, even though you worked yourself to get those things. In other words, you invented something called work to get your sheep and your goat. And you have them out there and you multiply them and all like that. Well, I'm taking part of them. Now, that's how I did that with a lot of people, so I accumulated a lot of capital doing that. Now I can loan people money that I get. And that's what they did. They gave Christopher Columbus a loan. And he went off across the seas, and then he started raising capital to pay back the people he owed. Now, how did he raise the capital? Robbing and stealing from the Arawak Indians. Start killing people, because that's a part of the robbery process. I mean, now people might, start thinking about this and say, well, where is Fuller going with this? I mean, is this the way you raise capital? Is this what he's advocating? No, I'm merely describing the ways that you get it. And so what I'm winding up with is that how should I instruct or suggest that black people get it? Well, the one thing I definitely don't want black people to get capital by robbing and stealing. So that leaves 2 other ways. You got to invent something or produce something that people want or need. That's one of the other ways. It's not but 2 more. It's not a 4th way. It's just that you're left with this other way. If you're not going to rob and steal, then you're left with the way of inventing something or producing something that people want or need. Or you ask the people who have it, which is what the demonstrators are doing. Now, if there's any other way to raise capital, I don't know what it is. And I would love for someone to tell me what it is. I would like for someone to tell me what that 4th way or the 5th way is for raising capital.
Now,
but those people out there who are saying, we want, we see that you have something because you're paying us. Well, give us a little more of what you're getting from the other people that we are helping you to get stuff from. I mean, what's incorrect about that, since we don't have any other way to do it except just get out here and rob and steal, and we're sure that you're not going to recommend that.
Right.
So what other way do we have? And basically, that is the position that most black people are in throughout the entire world.
Now,
we have to ask the people who have capital. There's no other way.
Right.
Because we should rule out forever robbing and stealing. Everybody out there within sound of my voice who's thinking about going out there and robbing somebody on the street, or going into the delicatessen, or going into a bank, or snatching a pocketbook, or an iPad, or whatnot, that should be absolutely off the charts by now for all of the people of this planet, particularly the people with dark skins, the people who are classified as non-white. No more robbing and stealing. And we're going to try to be inventors or producers of something that people want or need, and that won't leave anything but just some niche businesses. Lots of black people would say, well, hey, I don't want to rob and steal, and I don't want to beg either. So that leaves me one option. I have to produce something or invent something that people want or need. But the white supremacists have left very little in the way of any of the dark-skinned people of this planet producing and inventing something. Even when they try to produce something or invent something, if they make a few baby steps in that direction, the white supremacists will either impede it or take it over. And so you don't have any room for growth. So that just leaves you with the option of robbing and stealing, that second category, the biggest category, like Columbus did, stole a whole continent, you might say, directly, indirectly, or set the seeds for it. Or you can do what he did when he first got it. You ask people who have it. And so people call it begging. People call it, asking for handouts, asking for welfare. But that's basically how capital is gotten. Someone has even thought of a term that I didn't invent called corporate welfare, meaning there are corporations that run out of money. We've seen examples of that. I first noticed it on a big scale back in the 1980s. I think there was a gentleman named Mr. Lee Iacocca.
Lee Iacocca, yes, I was getting ready to say that.
And he asked for, he ran out of money trying to keep a corporation called Chrysler Corporation in car manufacturing. He tried to keep it going, but business was bad. The economy was failing. People weren't buying the cars like they should. And then some of the cars that were being made, the people didn't like them.
Yeah.
And he was trying to come up with inventions. I think he came up with something called the K car.
Right. By his own admission, there were problems with some of these products.
There were problems with some of the cars, right? So so what did Mr. Lee Iacocca do? He said, I got to get some money in order to stay afloat. Now, who will I ask for money? Will I go out on the street and start asking people for nickels and dimes? No. He said, I'm going to ask the people who have some real money. And who would that be? Well, something called government. Now, black people are usually told, you don't ask the government for anything. Pull yourself up by your weary bootstraps. Don't go to government thinking government is supposed to give you handouts or loans or anything else. Get out here on the prairie, like the pioneers did. And when you say pioneers, you're talking about aggressors now. That gets back to that robbing and stealing stuff, because the pioneers just didn't go out there and start taking land that was just given to them. Complete with all the tools and all like that. First of all, they had to ask somebody to loan them the tools or the money to get the tools. Then they took the tools, including rifles and muskets and six-shooters, and they decimated people called Indians, robbing and stealing here again. See how this works? See, I want everybody who's listening to this to get into this thing about labor. We're talking about labor, and labor is supposed to produce something. But what is labor? Labor is work. What do you mean by work? You mean you do something in order to get something. That's what work is. You do something in order to get something.
Now, Mr. Fuller, hold on here for a minute now.
Yes, sir.
If you say you do something in order to get something, and that's labor, and I want you to ponder on this, because we're going to get into this after we do this little exchange here. But the narcotics industry. The narcotics industry is probably not the biggest employer of black people, but certainly it's in the top 5. By every recognition, we know it's in the top 5. So should black people in particular work in the narcotics industry, especially the illegal narcotics industry? Is that a way to work to get something, Mr. Fuller?
The answer is absolutely not. We should drop that project, because that's what the white supremacists came up with as an idea for black employment after the 1960s. If you study the history of the 1960s and going into the 1970s, when did the narcotics start to really spread among black people on a large scale? It was after the 1960s, when black people were rioting in the streets talking about we need employment, we need better housing, we need better schools, we need jobs. Black people have always asked for jobs because they were not allowed to go and ask for capital on a large scale to build factories. Forget about that. We're going to give you money with no collateral to build factories all over the place where you are and employ people by the thousands, the hundreds of thousands? Oh, no. We don't do that among you dark-skinned people. We produce products, mostly little trinkets, little nonsense stuff, in our factories, and we employ you there, and then we get you to buy these little nonsense products, but we don't allow you to build up any capital on a large scale. We'll allow you a little mom-and-pop store, maybe. And if you start flourishing, if your little mom-and-pop store starts getting bigger, we will start putting pressure on you, one way or another. We'll cause you to dislocate. We'll say that you're violating the zoning laws, but you're a little barbecue stand.
Or we'll send people in there to steal your merchandise. And,
yes.
I've seen that firsthand. Stay right there, Mr. Fuller. We got a lot to cover on this. The narcotics industry as a way of employment. Mr. Fuller says no, absolutely. Wall Street, Black Wall Street. Is it possible? Why? He's raising some very good questions. Why don't we see some black airliners? Why don't we see major black manufacturing operations with all the so-called billions of dollars that black people have? Stay right there. More to come. Mr. Fuller is going to address that. Up next on the compensatory concept. Heard exclusively on TalkTamerRadio.com.
This is Satin, your MC host for the 7th Annual African Village Arts Festival. This is a 3-day village-type event that starts August the 16th, 17th, and 18th in Columbus, Ohio. We are calling for artists, sponsors, vendors, and volunteers. This festival is sponsored in part by Ohio Alliance for Arts Education. Please call 614-252-7525 or 614-252-2430 or email us at info@galleryinthehood.com for more information. See you there.
The United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Neely Fuller is considered as one of the substantial and basic books for understanding and effectively countering racism. Neely Fuller will turn upside down everything you've heard and everything you think you know about racism and how it works. Call area code 202-484-5461. 202-484-5461.
Hi, I'm Joan London, and if you're worried about your parent or a loved one living alone like I was, and you want reliable senior care information, then call A Place for Mom, the nation's largest senior living referral service. You'll get free information on assisted living, Alzheimer's care, nursing homes, even important financial information.
They had obviously researched every place, not just given me names.
Really? Yeah.
They found me a place for what she could afford, and it was magnificent.
We're now very confident that she's safe, and they just helped every step of the way, and I can't thank them enough.
So if you're struggling to find reliable senior living information, call A Place for Mom. This is a free service, and you can trust them to help you.
If you're struggling to find reliable senior living information for your mom or dad, then call or go online to get the free help you need during this turbulent time. Call now, 800-371-5898, 800-371-5898.
Richard Holt, research chemist, University of Rio Grande in southeastern Ohio. With your skin, you can see your condition. People always wonder how they get it. Don't worry about what you can see, worry about what you cannot see that can cause your condition. Environment, pollution, affects your skin. Richard's Remedy is a multi-purpose cream that works on a variety of skin conditions, such as psoriasis, eczema, poison ivy, acne, poison oak, and Morgellons disease. I sell it in a 1-ounce container through the internet for $12.95. There's Visa, American Express, MasterCard, Discover, Money Card, accepted. At richardsremedy.com. Richards with an S, remedy.com. RICHARDSREMEDY. richardsremedy.com.
Call 937-607-4259 or go to email info@talktainmentradio.com for a free sample of Richard's Remedy.
Are you a minority or women business owner looking for a great resource for your business? Well, you can stop looking. MBE Magazine is the one for you. MBE Magazine has been a national resource for minority and women business owners for almost 30 years. No one supports and understands you like MBE Magazine. Visit them today at www.mbemag.com to subscribe to the digital or print version. MBE is a proud sponsor of the Exceptions to the Rules radio show.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
We've got the power.
Justice is better than racism.
This is the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard. And, of course, we're here live every Tuesday with Mr. Fuller, live 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you don't catch us in the morning, you can catch us at night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A replay of this show. And if you don't catch the replay, of course, you can always go and listen to the podcast. All you have to do is go to TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard, but go to TalkTainmentRadio.com and then click on programs, and then there you go, click on Compensatory Concept, and then voila, it's right there. We are dealing with one of the areas of the 9 areas of life. One that we don't deal with probably as much as we probably should, but we've been dealing with at this point, labor. Mr. Fuller outlines 9 areas of life, and one of the key 9 areas of life is labor, employment, work, productivity, economic development. All of that's lumped, businesses, all that's lumped under labor. Mr. Fuller, we looked at the sources of employment or the sources of capital. For that reason, I can remember, Mr. Fuller, way back of course, I wasn't around, but my fathers and uncles and all used to tell me about the gangsters back then, how they would run the numbers. I'm sure, Mr. Fuller, you may have aware they would run numbers. Heroin was big selling back then, narcotics, and they would raise capital. But if you remember the movie American Gangster with Denzel Washington, they talked about how guys like Bumpy and all these other guys out of Harlem in New York, and they talked about how they raised money. But one thing they tended to do was to take that money and diversify. That means they would put it into a business over here, a business over there. Even boxers, legitimate income, like Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson used to do all of that. Sam Cooke, according to reports, did all that. He and Sam and Sugar Ray and all them guys, they took their money and they bought businesses. They set up all kind of other things to diversify. Now, you figure if you got all these guys that we've been reading about in Washington, D.C., for example, this Rayful Edmonds, I think that's his name, guys like that who allegedly supposed to have had millions and millions and millions of dollars. And yet we see not one black manufacturing plant, and huge ones, with all that money they were supposed to have had their hand on. No major development pieces that black people, no whole city block of commercial activity that any black person owns. I'm talking about a whole city, maybe 6 city blocks, totally city blocks of high rises and corporations and office buildings and all of the things like in Detroit. Allegedly, all of these millions of dollars of drugs have flown through Detroit, and yet Detroit is standing there begging for money because they can't make ends meet. Mr. Fuller, why don't we have huge manufacturing plants that manufacture innovative and creative products, new forms of transportation, all kind of stuff that black people need here and all over the world? Why don't we have this with all of the so-called, we're supposed to be having $1 trillion this year or next year, 1 or 2, supposed to mark time when $1 trillion supposed to pass through our hands. Why isn't any of this money being used for the creation of jobs, corporations, and things that make a population self-sustaining? Mr. Fuller.
Because the white supremacists, those white people, not talking about all white people, I'm talking about the most powerful white people who believe in the system of white supremacy, prevent that from happening. That's the answer. They don't want that to happen. They don't want anything that's going to be uplifting, you might say, to use that term, of non-white people to happen anywhere on this planet. And anytime they see something that's going to be constructive happening among non-white people, they step in. Black people are always talking about well, we need to improve ourselves. We need to do this. Marcus Garvey talked about it. Give me a little capital so that I can get a shipping line, and so that our people will not be beggars, so that the Negroes, that we have here, that's what we were called then, will not be beggars, will not be robbers and thieves, that you'll be able to walk the streets in Harlem and whatnot, and all other places where black people are. And you can be safe because black people will not rob and steal from you because they have plenty of everything. They no longer want to do that. Most people are like that. Once they have things, they don't go around doing things like robbing and stealing people on the streets and all like that. So we can prevent that by seeing to it that people have the things that they need. So they are not out in the streets. They're at home enjoying themselves. And looking at the money coming in and whatnot. They're not thinking about harming anyone or anything like that. That's what we want. So I want to start a shipping line where we can go back and forth to Africa and all like that. And the white supremacist said, don't you know that if we wanted you to do that, we would have thought of that ourselves, Marcus, and all the rest of you black people who are always talking about going into business. Do you think that you are going to go into business on my planet without dealing with me? And I'm already in the business of keeping you in your place. And your place is under my foot. I could put you in business overnight, all of you. I could put you all in business. I don't intend to do that, and I don't intend for you to do it on your own. And if you start out doing it, I'll give it lip service and all like that, like I'll help you, but I'll only help you up to a point. And then I will take over your business or I will crush it. That's the deal. And everybody who is in business, all the black people who are what you might call being successful in business, at some point, the white supremacists step in and say, okay, you have reached a point now where you're fixing to get out from under my control. And that's not going to happen.
Now, I see we've got several television corporations, Mr. Fuller, where I don't know. Let's see if what you say holds up. Now, you got BET, you got TV One, you got Bounce, and you got Oprah's. I think it's called Oxygen or something like that, where it's just reported she made a profit. Now, she's worth allegedly billions of dollars. Now, how does that model hold up? It seems to me that you are getting some people who are turning that money around, producing large-scale BTs all over the country. TV One's all over the country. Bounce is all over the country. And Oxygen's all over the country. So how does that, what you just said, Mr. Fuller, hold up against those effective models?
Well, they allow a little bit of it. They do it all over the world. There are plenty of people. There are people who are called, quote, unquote, Mexican, dark-skinned people who are super billionaires. But see, when you look at the average person who is called, quote, unquote, Mexican, how is that person doing? If you look at the average person who is so-called African, Black Africa, they call it, how is the average Black African doing today as we speak right now? And you might say, oh, well, there are a whole bunch of Black Africans who have millions and millions and millions of dollars riding around in limousines and whatnot. But compared to the number, see, everything that the white supremacists do has to do with percentages. What's the greater number? How are they doing? And this is the key. Allow a few of them to write a blank check. In other words, hand them a blank check. Just a few. You just got so many blank checks, and you had just hand them out. You can hand them out at random. You don't care which black person gets them. And let that black person flourish. Say, how many black people do you have out there in that valley? Say, well, we got 10 million. Well, pick out 200 or 500 or 600 and showcase them. Dump money on them, as much money as they want, that 500 out of that 10 million. Give them all the money that they want. Now, don't let them move it in such a way that it spreads out to all the rest of the people. Let them make all that they want. Let them live in a big castle, ride around in limousines, Provide all the limousines that they want. If they want 50 limousines, get them to them right now. Give it to them as gifts, as long as you keep it limited. Don't let it spread. Don't let it spread. That's a no-no. It's not supposed to trickle down, you might say, to the people whom they are supposed to be helping. And we will always say, well, we gave it to you. Yes, but only to you. And if you make any attempt to fan that money out among the general population so that the average person is doing better, then we are going to crack down on you and you're not going to have anything. We will exterminate you if necessary. And we can very easily do that. And going back to the 1920s or 30s, I believe, an illustration. I think there was, if I recall correctly, sometimes I get my facts mixed up, but I always ask people to correct me if I do. I think it was somebody called the Jones Brothers. They were in Chicago.
You're talking about in Chicago, yes.
Yes.
With Sam Giancana and all that, and the Chicago mob, yes.
And they were in the numbers business.
Yes, they were.
Okay, and they accumulated. They were actually, I understand, as far as personality is concerned, they didn't have the thug image. They were very nice guys, you might say.
Correct.
Gentlemen, and people who were family people and whatnot, and but they wanted to get out of the numbers business because the numbers business, the numbers racket, was illegal. So I understand that the Jones brothers decided to go into banking. And I understand that the white supremacists directly and indirectly said, oh, you're not going to do that. In other words, you think you're going to go legit, you black people who are doing something illegal to make money, and here on Chicago's South Side, you think that you are going to go legit and start opening banks and making small loans so that other black people can go into business and whatnot and compete with the white supremacists? No. And so I understand that they put the muscle on the Jones boys and drove them into Mexico.
Yeah,
where they retired. Now, they had plenty of money. Their families had plenty of money, but they were no longer in the business in Southside Chicago of trying to help the people on Southside Chicago.
Right.
What is the message?
The Chicago mob took it over.
Yes. See, in other words, anytime a black person tries to do something that's going to be constructive, then that's when the white supremacists step in and say, no, you're not going to do anything that's going to help people physically and mentally improve themselves.
You know something,
Mr. Fuller? As long as you're dealing in drugs,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're dealing in something, that's going to be derogatory, something that's going to lower the self-esteem of black people, as long as you are out here promoting gangsterism of any kind and whatnot and having black people slaughtering each other, we will dump all the money on you that you will ever need. The minute you start doing anything that looks like it's going to help people physically and mentally, and these people have dark skin, it's not going to happen. Or we will put a hit on you in a minute, one way or another, either drive you out of business or kill you.
I was wondering if you look at back in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, it started to tailor off a lot. But in the 70s, there were a lot of so-called black banks. Do you remember that? I mean, just in about every city, there was as many as well over 100. Black Enterprise used to keep a list. Do you remember that? We had one in Dayton, Ohio. I think you guys had a couple of them in D.C., Washington, D.C. Am I correct? During that period? Now, I don't see hardly any, anywhere. We have none in the state of Ohio. Not one. Now, I don't know what you have in D.C. Is there any in D.C. now?
They have one, I believe. I won't call his name because I don't know if that's legit. I mean, in this forum.
Now, I'm not talking about a credit union. I'm talking about a legitimate bank.
Yes, I think you have one.
One.
And it's fledgling.
And it's fledgling. Well, in a city like D.C., you would expect at least one. If you get past D.C., New York, and a couple of, I don't see them. I don't even know if Chicago used to have Carver or Seaway or something like that. I got to look that up. And maybe someone from Chicago can call and verify one way or the other. But black economic development as a concept is pretty much all but dead. I mean, if you go into the average African American, where African Americans live in large numbers, you don't see them controlling that economy, Mr. Fuller.
That's anywhere in the world. I don't care where you go, even all over Africa. I mean, it's not going to happen under the system of white supremacy. You have to replace this system with a system of justice.
But the Chinese have moved in to Africa, and they are now you're hearing stories about Africa on the rise. Has the Chinese made much of a difference there, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, because the Chinese are huge in number, and they have always been a threat to the system of white supremacy. But I'm quite sure that the white supremacists, knowing how astute that they're the smartest people on the planet, have proven to be so far, even though they believe in mistreating people, dominating and mistreating people based on color, they are the smartest and most efficient people on the planet, because they have had all of the resources and accumulated it over a long period of time to do so. Now, at some point, they're going to have to deal with these people called Chinese, because they are the ones who put the Chinese on their feet. They could have crushed them before they even got off the ground. So they are allowing them to do this. So it comes down to, why are they allowing them to do this? Do they intend to use the Chinese to actually get into a long, drawn-out, 100-year battle with the people in Africa? Is that the plan of the white supremacists? Because you better believe if they're allowing them to do anything that looks like it's constructive, it has a destructive intent in the long run. That's the way they operate. They'll start out doing something real nice. Even with the Indians, I mean, they came there saying, hey, let's sit down at Thanksgiving. I mean, let's all be nice to each other. And let's all, hey, Chief, come and join us. I mean, let's break bread together.
Mr. Fuller, stay right there. Don't go nowhere. We're going to get into a little bit more of that and what happened in the 60s and how all of that broke down. Stay right there. More to come on the compensatory concept, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com.
This is Satin, your MC host for the 7th Annual African Village Arts Festival. This is a 3-day village type event that starts August the 16th, 17th, and 18th in Columbus, Ohio. We are calling for artists, sponsors, vendors, and volunteers. This festival is sponsored in part by Ohio Alliance for Arts Education. Please call 614-252-7525 or 614-252-2430 or email us at info@galleryinthehood.com for more information. See you there.
The United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Neely Fuller is considered as one of the substantial and basic books for understanding and effectively countering racism. Neely Fuller will turn upside down everything you've heard and everything you think you know about racism and how it works. Call area code 202-484-5461. 202-484-5461.
Are you a minority or women business owner looking for a great resource for your business? Well, you can stop looking. MBE Magazine is the one for you. MBE Magazine has been a national resource for minority and women business owners for almost 30 years. No one supports and understands you like MBE Magazine. Visit them today at www.mbemag.com to subscribe to the digital or print version. MBE is a proud sponsor of the Exceptions to the Rules radio show.
This year, the 9th Annual African American Male Wellness Walks will be held in Dayton, Toledo, and in Youngstown, Warren. Please visit our website at www.aawalk.org for updates on wellness walks around Ohio. The City of Columbus will hold its 9th Annual African American Male Wellness Walk on Saturday, August 10th, 2013 at Livingston Park.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
We've got the power.
Justice is better than racism.
This is the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, radio the way it should be heard, the world's greatest radio. If you want to get in touch with Mr. Fuller and you want to get his works, you can go to www.producejustice.com, www.producejustice.com. Pick up his 2 works, and then if you want to talk to Mr. Fuller doing the live broadcast, which is going on right now all over the world, 1-877-932-9766. Let me repeat it, 1-877-932-9766. Mr. Fuller, we look at this China in Africa, where all of a sudden there's a lot of development going on in parts of Africa. Some say that people like down in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, who was the long-term president of Zimbabwe, he and Joshua Nkrumah, as you know, they started out together. Zimbabwe, and then you've got other areas. You've got South Africa, where, of course, black unemployment down there is as high as it's ever been, maybe higher. And now you've got some calling it a re-apartheid kind of condition brewing down there, where you're setting up these enclaves of whites only or blacks only, because you haven't had much so-called integration down there at all. And then you've got China and Africa. And I'm wondering, what are the implications for that? Because if China is over in Africa, does that mean that Chinese or communist Chinese or whatever you want to call them, are they going to also start making pacts with blacks in this area of the world called the United States, blacks in Brazil, blacks all over the world? And then what does that start to look like, Mr. Fuller?
Well, it's probably, until I see different, the refinement of the system of white supremacy. White supremacy goes through 4 stages, logically speaking. Establishment, that's getting it started. Establishment. Maintenance, that's keeping it going, because once you get a business going, established rather, you want to keep it going. So you have what you call the maintenance phase. In other words, going around making sure that the business is running smoothly. Then you have expansion. Once you make sure that your business is running smoothly, then you say, well, we might open another branch of this business down the road, because we're doing pretty well now. So that's what they call expansion. Now, how does the system of white supremacy expand? It expands by taking in more people. And how does it take in more people when you already have a system of white supremacy? You take in more people because more people are born. The people are born into the system that's already in place. You have a world system called the system of white supremacy. And all of the dark-skinned people are born into a system that's already off and running. And the system of white supremacy, of course, is a business.
Okay, but what's that got to do with China being in Africa, though, Mr. Fuller?
It has to do with the 4th stage, which is the refinement stage, which means you make your business look like you're doing something that you're really not doing, which means black faces up front, dark faces up front. Put on a suit and tie. The Chinese now do not dress the way that they dressed 1,000 years ago. They're dressed the way that a lot of white people led them to dress. You know, what you call the business suit and tie. All right, not the tunics and whatnot, and the styles that ancient China had back in the day when they say they're preserving their culture and all like that. Well, now, what culture are you taking on? Okay, now, is it improved culture? Well, when it comes to making things, yes, but are you actually improving the people? Do the people act better than they acted, say, many years ago? Or they just change clothes and they are better fed, but they don't act any different. Same way as the black people in the Northwestern Hemisphere. Black people now, for the most part, are not, they don't have the kind of food that they had on the table, say, in the 1920s I mean, you have much more food now. But even the food may not be as nutritious as it was right off the little farms that they had back then.
Mm-hmm.
And black people's behavior overall has not improved anywhere close to where it should be.
It's gotten far worse. It's far worse.
Yes. Our behavior, see, and this is what the white supremacists look at. Say, you know, you can feed hogs, and they can get fatter. You can have hogs that are running around starving and all like that, or you can feed them. But the hog is still a hog, or the deer is still a deer, and will have the same behavior as a deer or a hog if you don't do something with the mind, too. Okay? Well, in the case of a deer or a hog, well, a hog is supposed to have that same mentality. And a deer is supposed to have the same mentality of a deer that it had 1,000 years ago, I guess. But now people are supposed to improve, particularly if they are destructive. And black people are very destructive of each other and very destructive almost of anything that they touch worldwide. Now, the white supremacists want to keep it that way. The white supremacist says, even though I will feed you better because I got surplus food, but I'm not going to improve your mind at all. And that way I can always dominate you, even though you're well fed.
So what role does the Chinese play in this? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's in the process of I'm still in the process of trying to figure out where they're going with this. Because it's got to go one of two ways. Either the white supremacists are going out of business as white supremacists. They've decided that they're going to actually go the route of having a world that is dominated by the practice of justice, or, and I tend to believe, knowing how they are and knowing their history, until I see different, that they are making just another big move like the Don Corleones and the Tatalias and all the people that they depicted in The Godfather. They're just making a sophisticated move to do the same operation and make it look like they're making a whole new world altogether.
But, Mr. Fuller, let's follow the logic on that just for a second. Why? Why would you make a move like that? Why would you gamble at such a risk, at such a high level, where you turn over all of your production to a group of people who you say you fear the most, if I'm following the logic that you're laying down? Why would you turn your power over to your enemy? That makes no sense.
Well, it was reported to me, something that I read some years ago, something that a Nazi lieutenant said. He was talking to one of his sergeants during the battle, World War II, during a battle. And he said, during one of the breaks in the battle, to one of his sergeants, you know, after we Germans conquer the world and take it over, we're going to have to help build up an opponent somewhere. We don't know where it is right now, but we will build up some people somewhere to be very strong so that we can crush them again. That's the white supremacist mentality. That's the Romanesque mentality. That was Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. My 8th grade teacher told me that Alexander the Great had conquered so many people that when he finally got to what I think is now Egypt and looked south and saw nothing but desert, he sat down and cried. Why? Because there were no more people to conquer, no more people to slaughter, no more people to misuse. He had run out of people. And that same mentality prevails today. That's why the history books is full of the glorification of people like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Caligula, Nero, Hitler. He's being glorified indirectly. Even people who say they despise him, they glorify him. Hitler is the most prominent person in the 20th century by any measure. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Schicklgruber Hitler, a former failed artist and paper hanger, is the most distinctive person in the entire 20th century. This is why they talk about him more than anybody. Why? Because he was a destroyer on a grand scale, a manipulator, a arch propagandist that could influence people to do great things, but in order to destroy. In other words, the white supremacist philosophy. Build, 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 build. They believe in building. They're the greatest builders in the world. And they're also the greatest destroyers. After they build, they destroy. Then they build again, then destroy. They will educate, so-called, a black person. I mean, pay that black person all kinds of money, big money. Dress that black person up in fancy clothes. Give them everything that the black person wants. And then, watch it, even in show business. Then they will start destroying that person. Give that person drugs, so that the person's mind begins to go. Then the next thing you know, their body is gone. And then they'll say, well, that's the way things work out. That's all planned. That's the kind of minds that they have. You have to study. All you have to do, don't take Neely Fuller's word for nothing. Just look at the way they operate. They're right in your face. They're hiding in plain sight. They build up to tear down. Build up to tear down. All of their folklore, their movies and whatnot, is all about building up and tearing down. They like mysteries.
So
they write books about, murder
So is that
mysteries.
what you're saying is happening with this thing with China and Africa?
We started out this conversation talking about labor.
Labor.
And
yeah.
that's what they are doing. Labor is nothing but working to get a result. And that's what they are doing. I have to come to that conclusion until I see otherwise, because I don't know how all it's going to play out. But I know the history of the system of white supremacy. They don't do anything without thinking in terms of being destructive in the end.
Maybe it's out of their control. Maybe it's just not a white supremacist thing. Maybe it's just people making their own independent moves on the planet. What about that, Mr. Fuller?
There is that possibility. But I got to look at the people who are helping them make the moves. See, the Chinese, I think, went into Zimbabwe in the 1960s.
Yes, they did.
And then, either directly or indirectly, I don't know the names of the people, because I'm prohibited from saying anything like that anyway, because I really don't know. But knowing how the system of white supremacy operates, I think the Chinese went in Zimbabwe and started building railroads, which at that time, the white supremacists who are against us, they made and they operate just like the Corleones, they made them an offer that they couldn't refuse. In other words, you could come in.
Zimbabwe in the 60s was still Rhodesia.
Yes,
yeah.
But in other words, when the people said they wanted their independence, then the Chinese, I understand, some Chinese came in and started building something that was a no-no. And that was railroads. Railroads means massive progress.
Transportation.
In other words, yes, you're going to make a quantum leap.
Infrastructure. Yes.
Infrastructure. And the white supremacists, I think, the usual suspects, must have told the Chinese, because they got out of there then, hey, you can come in and sell them little trinkets. You can sell them little hair pieces and things like that. You can sell them a lightening cream for your skin and stuff like that, little mom and pop stuff. But you're not going to build any railroads, because I'm not ready for these dark people to have anything that's infrastructure that's going to build them up as an empire people. And the Chinese got out of Zimbabwe because they were made a muscle offer.
So why
has
we got about 30 seconds? Why has that changed now?
Because maybe they have become more sophisticated now, or it could be, but I wouldn't bet on it, that the white supremacists have decided to slowly go out of business.
Mr. Fuller, thank you so much. This is a very intriguing conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for